And welcome to the Value Exchange. We've got, as usual, our hosts, me, Rob Pye, and Annabelle Lambert. Our special guest today is a former Chief Constable of the UK Police Force. We have Bill Skelly. And Bill has been around in the police force 30 years. He's been a keen proponent of sport all through his working career, and for some reason got involved with Ethos in a wellbeing venture that we call Team Police. And he currently chairs the joint venture between the UK Police Force and Ethos, this Team Police venture. So just quick introductions if this is the first time that you've tuned in. I'm Rob Pye, one of the founders of Ethos, along with Annabelle. I often say I'm a reformed management consultant because I met Annabelle 24 years ago now when we were working at EY. And my thing in terms of social value and making the world a better place is that being frustrated with organisational bureaucracy. Not that I want to do away with organisational bureaucracy, but I just think we often solve the wrong problems very well, and we don't do a good job for people and planet and social value. So that's sort of me. Annabelle, what about you?
Yes, so I'm Annabelle Lambert. I'm still in West Sussex. I'm pleased to say I still have two kids. I am in the middle of half term. I may have background noise. Dogs usually bark. But my thing, why I'm here is all about really, I'm on a mission with people to put them back at the centre of what they're doing in their relationship with their work, to give more meaning, more purpose, and just create a lot more social value, I think, around the world generally. I'm going to invest in a white cat quite soon. But that's me.
Okay, so Bill, really informal, but do you want to just talk us through a bit of policing? And if I might need to mute if my dog just decides to bang open the door, but police, sport, and then finish this segment with how you found Ethos. So the whole bit would probably be within half an hour of the interview. But so yes, introductions, Bill.
Okay, well, thank you, Rob. Thank you, Annabelle. It's a delight to be able to speak with you about the issues of value and social capital and how we can improve those. I joined the police service 33 years ago, back in 1990, up in Edinburgh, where I am now, and had a thoroughly rewarding and interesting career for the next 31 years. I retired just coming up for a couple of years ago. And throughout that career, I suppose I felt that my purpose was to deliver the best possible value to policing in whatever force I was in. And as I moved through the hierarchy of the police service, I had the opportunity to have more influence over larger areas, and indeed the whole of the UK as part of the national police coordination that takes place at that level. How did I go about kind of adding that value? Well, I suppose that's the subject of the next half an hour, and also what I've been doing throughout my life. But essentially, it was trying to recognise where the positive things that I could do would have best effect. And that wasn't always necessarily in the way that I could directly affect the public, although at the beginning that was definitely my role. But as I progressed, it was more about the influence I could have over the workforce, my colleagues, and the influence I could have over the kind of service that we were delivering. Throughout that period, I've also been a very keen sports person, and volleyball is my kind of passion. I've been part of that setup for over 40 years and still am. I still coach and I still play. And throughout my policing career, I was part of the police sport setup. And again, as time went on, I moved into different roles within that. And for the last 16 or so years, I've been part of the management setup of police sport across the United Kingdom, and able to do what I can to improve the health and well-being of police officers and staff and retired employees through sport and through the physical activity that they can take part in. How did I come across ethos? Well, I suppose that was kind of a happy kind of coincidence at the right time. I had been sort of concerned over the level of funding that was dwindling within the police sport area, and was seeking to find new ways to bring external investment into Police Sport UK. And I came across the joint venture that was taking place at that point between Ethos and the armed services. And this looked like a really interesting, really innovative way of engaging with the commercial sector to bring extra cash into the armed services sport and support them. And I thought that this could be replicated within the police environment. Unfortunately, so did Rob. And he felt that this was also an idea that we could start up within the policing environment. And from those early discussions, we came to the agreement of having Team Police, which is now essentially the forward-facing brand of police sport across the United Kingdom. But it is very much about engaging with commercial companies and encouraging them through their responsibilities about increasing social capital, but also through their interest in networking with the police sector, to part with their money, and for us to then use that in a not-for-profit organisation to invest in the well-being of officers and staff right across the country. I'm glad to say that despite very difficult start, because we got going during the pandemic, that we have now got some really good traction, and indeed have started to diversify into the areas of sporting grants, and have been successful in being awarded grants from Sport England to support other physical activity work outside of the traditional approach that Police Sport UK has had. So, real exciting joint venture. We're at very interesting times as we look to develop our kind of standalone organisation. But it's been a fascinating time for me, and has really been something that I've enjoyed, particularly as I've left the full-time policing role and taken up more part-time roles with different organisations like Team Police.
So I want to take you back to a quick question uh, raised when you were talking about your influence within the police. So
Mm-hmm.
and talking about culture.
Mm-hmm.
So as a 30+ year public servant in the police force, there's a lot of culture there.
Mm-hmm.
And then you transitioned outside. So lots of people find that transition hugely challenging.
Mm-hmm.
Public service to people, inverted commas, retirement. It's a transition. It's certainly in your case not what one might conceive as a retirement. But how is and then ethos and now your life outside of the force? How different is the culture on the outside versus the inside? And then just to follow up to that, how similar is it? What are your sort of learnings to share in terms of that your cultural transition or the cultural uh, uh, components of that?
Yes. So there's a lot of things which some of them are difficult to unpick because they are kind of interwoven and layered on top of each other. So you can't necessarily define, say, the culture of policing in a short sentence or a kind of single kind of word. Um, so it's always going to be a bit of a partial answer to that question. But essentially, I suppose. Um, the, there are real positives about the culture of policing in public service, and they tend to be around the duty aspect, the sense of duty, and the sense of discharging or doing that duty. So that brings with it the sort of action focused, task focused approach, which seeks to see things kind of completed, see things getting done, um, and that that can be, and for a lot of environments, a real enabler to achieving any particular kind of goal or milestone. The unfortunate flip side of that is that with most public services, there's also a lot of bureaucracy. So it's almost like the push and pull. The pull is this draw to delivering on a sense of duty, but the push back against it is almost labyrinthine bureaucracy and decision making, which then tends to kind of slow things down. So you have this tension that exists around wanting to achieve things, uh, and then having to achieve them within an environment of administrative processes. And those processes seem to get more and more complex and more numerous as time goes on. So that brings about an interesting culture, doesn't it? Because you're going to have this sense of tension that people are going to have to hold, because not everything can get done overnight. And particularly because you have this difference between what policing would describe as an operational environment, which is almost, policing loves a crisis. And I don't mean to, talk that down, because quite often these crises are life threatening or life losing. So I don't wish to kind of come across sort of flippant about it, but very often it's around the emergency response or the quick time response. And there's lots of training and lots of effort goes into developing that cultural approach. That then struggles with slower activity. So if you have to introduce a well-being initiative over a period of 2 years, that is a challenge for the culture of policing, because it is geared towards quick time change, lots of things that happen during that kind of lots of disruption, short term, and then move on to the next thing. Trying to embed slower change, trying to make a what we might call it a step change, is a much more difficult thing to do within policing. And so there's that part of it. And then in terms of the transition coming out of it, well, I suppose you then those two sides change. I've kind of been engaged now in environments where there isn't the same pressure or sense of doing things quickly, but then there's also not so much bureaucracy. It's kind of, well, let's be flexible. Let's approach this in a more innovative, more interesting way, and let's be prepared for it not necessarily to work straight away, but let's try it. And so that that difference is very interesting. It's very interesting. Um, and I think that if you're able, as a leader, particularly, if you're able to keep the drive but embrace the ambiguity, then you are going to be very happy. But also you're going to help a lot of people and organizations, because that's quite rare. That's that joint holding of those two things together. So I do feel that it has been interesting as you transition from the kind of full-time, full-on employment to something different, and working with others. And it is, a source of reflection for me to consider, well, how do I bring the best of all those worlds to bear on whatever given issue that I am faced with.
Yeah, and that it leads me to a slightly complicated question that I haven't had time to express simply. But Annabelle and I were just talking about it prior to this after some article reviews from a guy called Michelle Bowens, who hopefully will be on the show soon. Although we haven't asked him. Hello, Michelle, you coming? But and he's the founder of something called the peer-to-peer foundation, which is
Mhm.
all about the sort of individual behaviors that we need to develop. Culture's a big word. I'm picking it into, as you've done brilliantly, in bureaucracy and duty. And something that is a problem that we want to solve in the world is to do with the behaviors or culture that comes from the established wisdom of economics, which in a word you might say,
A tiny topic.
if it doesn't have a price, it has no value, because economics is about scarcity. The buying and selling of scarce resources, and yet it doesn't work very well for natural resources such as air and the world that we live in, and minerals that are by definition finite, or organic things like animals and nature, because they don't follow the established wisdom of economics. And yet, I believe when you use the word duty, that you're unpicking much, much more when you say that in terms of public service than following rules. A sense of social value, a sense of purpose and mission, that actually you're there to do something that puts into society rather than takes out. And something that fascinates me, and has done for the last 15 years of this venture, is that there is a different culture in policing than there is in an organisation that is, primarily there to produce profit, regardless of people and planet. So, if there was a lovely question, have you had further thoughts? And this is just oversimplifying it, in how to stitch all of that together. Your last bit was, well, what could I apply inside? What have I learned outside? What's your Tony's grand theory of everything, was a previous interview that we, system theory. Have you had any thoughts on where this might take you, and what motivates you most in the space?
I suppose the notion of what is profit in that context. So, as you've mentioned, the economic model of what ultimately trying to increase some kind of economic value, which tends to have its definition in sort of financial value, some sort of GPD or something that's going to increase. And then sort of saying, well, there are other definitions of profit or gain. And when you look at something like a public service, you're trying to define, well, what is the gain that that organization is bringing? What is the gain that that individual is bringing as part of that organization? And trying to redefine it so that people can relate to it, people can understand that their activity for which they're getting paid, or may not be if they're volunteers, for which their activity, to how is that contributing to the gain the organisation is seeking to achieve. So for policing, I very simply define the gain as improving the safety of everybody who lives, works and visits in any particular area. So how you break that down, and then if you've defined it in those sort of simpler and clearer ways, saying, well, how do you align your activity best to achieve that gain? And so what you do, what are you actually doing that is then improving the overall position of you and the organization in achieving what it's trying to achieve? Now, that probably to a lot of people sounds straightforward, but you may or may not be aghast at how rare that actually happens in practice. How individuals, very largely speaking, have little understanding as to what they're actually.
They're never required to think about it. They're never asked to think about it.
So the interruption now, I have to get excited about this, is that's the perfect segue into value exchange. So, we could say value exchange, social value exchange, economic value exchange, environmental value exchange. So this enlightenment or awareness of all the things that are helping, that might not have a number, might not have a monetary value, might not, but it is about, if you talk about safety, security, cohesiveness of a community, or all of these concepts. So we're the thing that would excite me most anyway is is more conversations, which is when we have value recognition, we're not trying to just have a conversation about, well, where's the money in this? Strip all of that, but actually, where are the conversations that are important about this? So is there stuff inside policing, in team police, in what you want to do moving forward that might relate to promoting more conversation, more about how these things, these social value, might be achieved, or where you might be able to help to raise awareness? Where are the big opportunities, and what are the challenges in your mind? So again, sorry for such small questions, but I know you love them.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a huge number of opportunities, and as I mentioned right at the start, in terms of push-pull, there are certainly plenty of barriers in the way. But let's kind of talk about it. And there are also different kind of levels. So there is the multi-agency level. How do you better coordinate collaborations and partnerships and cooperative activity across the
Mm-hmm.
public and private sector? And there are, as
Another
we
small point.
yeah, exactly. As we've become aware, there are new public duties in relation to violence reduction, and so how are you actually going to make those work any better than some of the previous collaborations on other kind of civic duties? So there's that kind of level. There's organizational level in terms of how do you make the corporate organization more productive, more aligned to achieving goals. And then there's the individual level as part of that organization. How do you know? And I suppose the common theme of all those, as you have kind of articulated it, is the concept of exchanging value, as opposed to any other kind of dialogue or lack of dialogue that might have been taking place. So throughout the policing organization, there's things like performance development reviews, the kind of PDRs and performance development plans, PDPs, and so on. And I never liked them. They are not generally well adhered to in terms of them actually being carried out. So you would have an annual one. There's plenty of evidence out there that the actual completion rate is very kind of poor. So well below 100%. I mean, in some cases, like 50%. And some are years out of date. So if you're not actually having the conversation, then you're not going to be exchanging value or increasing someone's connection to the purpose. Even if you are having a conversation, if the conversation is poorly constructed, and the ones that I've experienced over 30 years were, by and large, all of them poorly constructed. So they were written by people who weren't really, in my view, trying to get an idea of value and purpose and real dialogue. And some of that was because if you do that, then you have to be prepared for the answers.
Yeah.
So someone tells you a lot, a whole bunch of stuff, and you have to then acknowledge it, listen to it, and act on it. And large organizations, large bureaucratic organizations like police forces don't really want to hear that. They want to hear that you've done this many things and that you're going to carry on doing them, and well done. See you next year. And if that sounds harsh, that's not nearly as harsh as I could be, because it's
No, I think that sounds quite normal. I think often organisations, both wherever they are not prepared to be on the other side.
yes.
I find that's not unusual. I don't think
And what
that's
they
being
have to
harsh
do
at all.
is rethink or reimagine what the expectation for them might be. So it doesn't necessarily mean that they have to have lots of vacancies and lateral movement and changes or so on. It might just simply be acknowledging that the link the individual is making to the organization needs to be described or thought of in a different way. But again, generally speaking, organizations and particular kind of HR departments who are there and given a job to do find it difficult to then think a bit differently about what that conversation will take place. And it's the same, as I say, at a kind of organizational, at a kind of corporate level, is a dialogue around the purpose of being there and how you describe that purpose and how you're going to achieve it. So what gain are you trying to achieve? So board level, corporate level, executive team level discussions tend to get very sidetracked on other issues. As I say, if you've spent 25 years being a doer in emergency or crises or planned event type things, that's not necessarily a helpful mentality or characteristic. If you're then in an environment where you're talking about something differently that you're going to have to achieve in different ways, you can't just tell the organization, go and stand on that line and do that. That's not how it's going to work. You have to have more a different approach. And so, and then at the third level is the level of collaboration. This is where it becomes even more interesting, because you then have very different cultural perspectives or outlooks or notions of value coming together with either a directive because it's legislation or a shared desire because it feels like the right thing. They come together, but with no necessarily real work together to understand how they're going to achieve that. And at its simplest level, you might have something like a police kind of culture which says we want to do this and we want to do it by next Monday. And then you might have another organization that says, well, we want to do something similar, but it will be a year from now or 2 years from now. Or actually it's not doing that we're here for. It's discussing this. It's about sharing information, sharing dialogue. It's about having a channel of communication, and the gain for us is having dialogue, whereas the gain for you is constructing something new or dismantling something old. And we're already talking two different languages and really achieving the same thing. So clear understanding of what value you're seeking to achieve together comes around by having that conversation. So a value exchange at a collaborative level seems to me like a hugely important and beneficial thing. So you asked kind of, Rob, where are the opportunities? Well, I've tried to describe some of them. They're out there and they're huge. The barriers to it are that some of these systems are hardwired into the organization. They are in with the foundations, and there are lots of people that benefit by them being the way they are. So the old kind of Machiavellian, the innovator, is at risk from everybody else around them, because that change is going to be really difficult. And that was a terrible paraphrase of Machiavelli. But then he wrote in Italian, and so it doesn't really matter. Yeah, any English translation is going to be a wrong one. So there's lots of things which are which are pushing against this kind of innovation and change, and that's where it's about trying to kind of either do it organically by inspiring some individuals to take this forward, or some areas to kind of take it forward, or seeking to do it. I mean, I suppose in a different way, because if you're talking about a wholesale introduction of a new way of doing something around people management, then there's a whole organizations out there in terms of the HR directors forums and all this kind of thing, where they you've got to persuade some people in there that this makes sense and this is going to change. And then you've got costs and everything to all. So I suppose that the barriers are people are comfortable with the status quo, even though it's not actually very productive and it's frustrating and it's bureaucratic and it's wasteful. The safety of the status quo is compelling, whereas the risk and ambiguity and scariness of something different and change, that will hold some people, or hold perhaps a lot of people kind of back, even though at some level they might be persuaded that actually it's got to be better than what we've got, because what we've had for decades and is pretty poor.
So I'm going to just attempt to just do a couple of words of summing up, and then just leave you for the final words, Bill, because it's just coming up to the half an hour, and we may cut a bit out, edits, although it's just been all so brilliant. My brain is just spinning all over the place, so it'll be a terrible job of summing it up. But the where to start? But so on the opportunities and barriers, and your summary of multi-agency, multi-organizational collaboration, single organizational issues, culture, individual, is a fantastic summary, I think, of both the opportunities and the barriers there. Last week we interviewed another great mind, a guy called John Stepper, who has written a book. I don't know when he wrote it, maybe a decade ago, called Working Out Loud. And Working Out Loud is an attempt to communicate, a more open and inclusive culture, rather than one that is bounded by any particular, organization or hierarchy. And he made the point, it's in use by lots of people all over the world, lots of organizations, that when he first tried to introduce it, for him it was a viral mass movement that individuals would then sort of percolate into organizations, and then organizations would just get it and then spontaneously, culturally
combust.
well, in a good way, in a good way. But he's now working much more for HR directors, being commissioned by the bureaucracy to go in and do training and development under the guise of an HR business case. And of course, the summary of where we got to at the end of this chat is the barriers are significant, and it is those barriers that we need to think collectively of. How to address those barriers, and there's no right or wrong answer, but it's the sort of continual experimentation. Tony calls active research. So you try and you learn, and you fail and you learn, and succeed and learn. And I think that the reasons to change are getting impossible to ignore wherever you are in the world at the moment, whether you're in an organization or whether you're rich or whether you're poor, or a single person outside, or because social justice, climate change, net zero, biodegrading kind of wildlife issues, wherever you look, there's sort of the call to change, I think, has never been greater, in my view anyway, but maybe I'm wrong, or whatever. But it's how to integrate on those three levels. Do you start by helping a group of people get involved in those conversations, value exchange outside? Do you have some corporates that will experiment? Maybe small organizations, maybe big, but maybe tiny organizations. Do you actually get a group of organizations together to kind of talk much more about value, the social value about, and everybody is, whichever organization, everybody's talking about this stuff. So it does seem as though the scales may be tipping, that if we do what we've done for the last 200 years and keep doing that, we'll just all be extinct pretty quickly. So, we're in the sphere of wicked problems. And I think that if I was to summarize simply the point that's come out of this, it would be dialogue. We've got to talk about this stuff, which is what we're trying to do badly, maybe, in the value exchange series. But thank you so much. And I'll leave the final words to you, Bill, if you want to say anything. But my bad summary followed by your good. Over to you.
So thank you for inviting me. I'm very happy to kind of to talk about these things. There's a couple of points. The first one following on from what you've said. So yes, dialogue is important, and it's important at all of those levels that we've been chatting through. So I think there's no one level that's going to necessarily unlock the other two. And even if you had dialogue in the boardroom, unless that spreads into action elsewhere, it's going to be isolated within the boardroom. It's got to be whole organizational change. It's got to be partnership and network kind of change. But how you bring that about, I think, is through a number of different points of contact, and that's creating multiple points of contact and influence. That's going to do that at the most senior levels of government through to the small independent organization that's just going to pick it up and become an exemplar. But it is also about the doing. And I'm sure psychologists listening would say, well, I'm obviously going to say this, aren't I? Because I did 31 years in the police service and I've just described the culture as being a doing culture. So I'm going to say, oh, but we need to do stuff. Well, yeah, okay. So I'll be true to my stereotype and just kind of say that is the case. That one of the things I was really proud of in my career, and certainly the latter part of it, was that we didn't just talk about these issues, we did stuff. I ensured that stuff changed and that stuff happened. That it wasn't just a dialogue in a committee room or a conference room. It was then about, right now, what does this mean for the organization? How are we going to create a different environment? Now, does that mean I build gyms? Does it mean I give people time off? Does it mean that we have extra kind of support services? If it does, then let's do all of those things. And because when we do these things, people will judge us by the actions that we've implemented, not necessarily by the good words or the fine writing that we put elsewhere. So I'm very proud that we did change dialogue into action, because then you create outcome. And the final bit I'd kind of leave you with is that this is looking at individuals and organizations in a very kind of rounded sort of way. Policing, in my view, had talked about the health and well-being of individuals in a two-dimensional way. They talked about physical health and mental health, and they're both really important, no doubt about that. But to me, there were two other dimensions. So there's a four-dimensional approach to this, and that the other two were emotional health, and the best word I can use to describe this, and this is someone who is not religious, but is spiritual health. The health, and this is one that we've talked about particularly in value exchange. It's about connection to a purpose, connection to a goal, connection to an organization's way of working at a very individual level. And simply put, people should be healthy. They should feel valued. So the physical and mental aspects of it. They should be happy. For goodness sake, you should be happy at your work. We should create happiness. So when we had a family day, first family day the force had in a decade, that was about just people smiling and being happy, and also feeling valued, and also doing other stuff. But also,
yeah, it's like I always refer to that as enjoyment, or fun, enjoyment in the sense that when the day, I mean, can't imagine the stress on the front line in the police force, but even on those days when everything is just awful, you still want to come back to work the next day, because it's like, I know I'm right here, I enjoy it, I'm happy, I'm connected with what I'm doing.
Yes,
those things,
and that final one. So the spiritual side of being connected to some idea of purpose, and reconnecting people with that purpose when they've lost it. And there's loads of stuff out there that says that if you are a person who is connected with the purpose of your organization, you will be more resilient, you will be physically and mentally healthier, you will be happier, and you will do better work. You'll be more productive, you will add more value. So the idea of a value exchange, or a process where you are discussing with someone, having dialogue and a conversation with someone around the value that they're adding, inevitably means that you are connecting someone closer to the purpose that they feel they have, and the purpose of the organization. And that's why it's kind of scary to organizations, because they have to listen to that, and they have to manage that and cope with that and absorb that. But the old kind of saying that would come from people saying, well, how will we cope if we do that? What will happen? These individuals will want to move places, they might leave the organization. Well, the answer to that is, well, what if you don't? You end up with people that are not connected, that are not happy, that don't feel valued, and are unhealthy. And that has got to be a worse outcome, hasn't it? So change yourselves, reimagine how you should perform this, and then get people get people on board with the value that they can add, and you will fly.
What a wonderful way to wrap up this episode of the Value Exchange. Bill, thank you very, very much. It's been a huge honour to listen to your wise words. Annabelle, as always, thank you. Until the next episode, goodbye.